Implementation is about a deliberate and thoughtful process of turning evidence and research into policies or practice. So it is about avoiding kind of haphazard or best practice or best attempts, but using established methodologies to try and put a structure around how things are turned into real life. And by doing that, that increases the chances of success of the policy or the strategy delivering the outcomes that people are expecting.
Well, there's a widely acknowledged gap between research and its implementation in order to see outcomes, better outcomes. There's a gap in terms of the time lag, the time that it takes for new knowledge to become changes in practice. And there's also a gap in it being accessible and usable for people who are developing policies or developing new practices or designing new services. There's a gap in accessibility and being able to get a hold of research, see what it means for you and use it. And there's another gap in terms of people produce research. They have a certain intention, a certain understanding of how that could make a difference, but how it is taken up and applied can not be in line with the original intention and may not then be as effective or see such good effects. For us, we've been doing a little bit of work with academics in Ireland and Northern Ireland to do some sort of common thinking about how implementation science could be useful to academics in order to support them to produce evidence that's going to be more usable and more easily taken up by the policymakers, the service designers, the intervention designers. And we've run some training and been getting some feedback along the lines of a couple of kind of theories or hypotheses that we've got. There's this thing called the active implementation formula. And the active implementation formula says that if you have got an effective intervention or an effective practice, and you multiply that by effective implementation methods, and you multiply that by an enabling context, then you're much more likely to see socially significant outcomes. And that it's a sort of well-known formula that's been around in the implementation world for a long time. It's widely accepted. And so we've been sort of posing the question about how can the implementation influenced research strengthen that formula by providing evidence in a format that has got implementation in mind and is more easily taken up and used to design the effective interventions. We have also been working with researchers to see how implementation could run almost like a thread throughout their work. So, is implementation science useful whenever you're designing your research question? Well, potentially yes, because if you have got implementation in mind whenever you're doing particularly applied research, then you'll be thinking not just about what is the evidence telling us, but how will the evidence be used? What's the context in which the evidence is going to be useful? What does it fit with? And then through the research methodology itself, which gives academics an evidence-based process for conducting their research, where you might think about the enablers and barriers to you being able to achieve your research, to the kind of the process-related elements of implementation science. And then also in terms of how academics then produce their findings. So how do they frame what they have learned in order for it to be able to be easily taken up and absorbed and used by service designers, policymakers, etc. And so we have been working with them to think about a couple of models that could potentially be useful, and one in particular. So we've been looking with them at this thing called the hexagon exploration tool. And the hexagon exploration tool is usually used by people who are trying to decide which evidence-based program is right for my service or for my population, or maybe comparing different programs to work out which is actually best placed for our kind of implementation context. Or maybe just to review a service that you're already running. And there are different components to this exploration tool that was developed by University of North Carolina National Implementation Research Network. And so the domains of the hexagon tool are, is there a need for this program? For practitioners, the way practitioners would use it would be, is there a need for this program? Is the evidence good, and does the evidence apply to our context? Does it fit with things that we're already doing? Does it fit with the culture of this organisation? Does it fit with the culture of our population? Is it usable? Are we going to be able to pick it up and use it, or are we going to need to do a lot of work to make it usable? Do we have the capacity to run it, or are we going to need to employ different people, or are we going to need to train people? And then what additional supports are we going to need? So is there going to be external expertise that's going to be needed, or a new IT system, etc.? So we've been looking with our academics at how the research itself, applied research, can be framed in order to take account of some of these elements, so that whenever you are asking your research question, whenever you're framing your work and thinking about who you're going to be talking to, and how you then present your findings, that potentially some of these elements are going to be able to be there and easily picked up and sort of used. And that's kind of in our attempt to close this gap between good evidence being produced and its uptake and use to produce evidence-based interventions, which can then result in better outcomes for people and communities. When we were working with colleagues at Science Foundation Ireland, as it was then, we did a lot of work with them on looking at focusing on the social value of their research. And a lot of that work was focused on trying to think about, rather than what am I going to produce and what am I going to do, thinking about what is the difference that I want to make and working backwards from that, so that research impact does not just look like this is getting taken up and being used, or it's got good citation, or it's brought in further funding, but that it has been able to increase social value for the communities that it was aimed at, or for the problem that it was aimed at, or maybe just the opportunity that it was aimed at, that you're actually able to see the difference and keep that in mind when you're planning your work. What is the difference that we want to make?
Do get in touch with us to see how we could help you.